While black people were working with white allies to establish educational opportunities, also in Baltimore, they were at the same time working to create a, an institution that would anchor the black community in Baltimore. And the fact that they are organizing this while the Civil War was still going on is just so impressive to me. So this group of, the exact number's a little unclear to me, but somewhere 30 to 40 black Baltimoreans pooled their money and purchased this building in 1865. They paid $16,000 for what was sometimes called the hospital and sometimes called Newton University. You don't need this backstory, but it confused me, so I had to learn it. Newton University had been chartered by the state back in 1845. It got into some legal trouble and wound up closing in 1859, very short-lived Maryland University. And during the Civil War, the university, now empty, was converted to a Civil War hospital. And so here we are, 1865, the Civil Wars come to an end, the building's no longer used as a hospital, it's sitting vacant, and they got a decent deal, the black people who pooled their money, and purchased the building, and spent another $5,000 to transform it. They didn't want to buy a hospital that used to be a university, they wanted a community center. And so they paid for all these renovations to transform it into a place with a giant lecture hall where the community could come and listen to important speakers, a library that would be open to black Baltimoreans. There were no public libraries in Baltimore at this point, but the private libraries excluded black people. Big library, a musical department, schoolrooms in it for educational purposes and workshops. It's pretty impressive. And it opened in September 1865. It was a dramatic way for black Baltimoreans to claim the city. Right? Like, we're not going anywhere. This is our city too. We want to help shape it. Frederick Douglass came back to Maryland to speak at the opening of the institute that bore his name. And the quote there is from Frederick Douglass in that speech. "The establishment of an institute bearing my name by the colored people in the city of my boyhood, so soon after the act of emancipation in this state, looms before me as a first grand indication of progress." That was my attempt at a Frederick Douglass impression. No audio exists of Frederick Douglass, but the descriptions of his voice made me wish that I could do it. Also, 1865, that was the year that the 15th Amendment was first passed by Congress. That passing by Congress part had happened back in January of 1865, before Abraham Lincoln's assassination. An amendment has to be passed by Congress and then needs to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. Lincoln's successor, after he got dead, was Andrew Johnson, who had been a senator from the state of Tennessee. And then Lincoln chose him as his vice president. Well, now Lincoln's dead, and Andrew Johnson, a Southerner, became the new president. Johnson immediately told the southern states they would have to ratify the 13th Amendment in order to be readmitted to the Congress. So in a way, you could think of it like this. Hey, look, y'all started this war, you tore our country apart, so we're not going to let you back into the U.S. government until you agree that slavery's over. So enough states ratified the 13th Amendment by December, and the 13th Amendment became officially added to the Constitution. Maryland, having ended slavery in 1864, was the fourth state to ratify the 13th Amendment. Because, you know, it didn't change anything in Maryland. Now, while the new president, President Johnson, had insisted that southern states had to ratify this amendment, he was elsewhere really lenient on white Southerners. And that really creates the political turmoil that's going to lead us into that Reconstruction period. But before we go back to the national events which affect the state of Maryland, let's come back in local once again, down on the ground in Baltimore in 1865, where this surge of black people coming into the city during the war had accelerated the white working class hostility to black people in Baltimore. Remember, we talked about some of this previously. It's white workers who feel like they should have those jobs because they're white. Often the German and Irish immigrants were the most vocal and aggressive about this. I think that's revealing in a way. It's like they've just learned about American whiteness. And they're like, hey, isn't whiteness supposed to always benefit someone like me? Then why is that black guy caulking those ships? Shouldn't I be a caulker? Black people had been driven out of most skilled professions in Baltimore during the 1850s. But caulking remained a profession with sizable black involvement. Remember, Frederick Douglass had been a caulker back in Baltimore. That word is C-A-U-L-K, caulk. Remember, that's the stuff that you put in to seal the hull of the ships so the ships don't leak. And of course, shipbuilding, huge industry in Baltimore. So 1865, there were white workers across Baltimore who started attacking black workers down at the docks. All sorts of violent attacks at the docks. They're trying, through violence, to drive black caulkers out. Often, actually, what they're trying to do is get the white employers to stop hiring black caulkers. And amid this violence and general chaos down at the docks, Isaac Myers, a black Baltimorean who had gone to one of those private schools that was established through the churches back before the war, Myers gathered a bunch of investors and created, they had a different name first, but they eventually changed it to the Chesapeake Marine Railway and Dry Dock Company. A black shipyard created with some white investment, and they leased the place from a white owner. But for the most part, it's black money put up to create a safe workspace for black people. Here too, you might notice that that black people's goal is not separation. Their goal is to be treated like everyone else. And when they can't get it, they wind up creating separate things. The Chesapeake Marine soon was employing several hundred black caulkers. They've got their own workspace. Black people, that is. Now, that if you had one of the jobs at Chesapeake Marine, that was great. But across the city, lots of black caulkers had lost their jobs without getting a replacement one here. Myers called for a convention of black Marylanders in 1869, focused on trying to achieve economic success. And he worked with people around the country to try to create a national black labor union, which he never quite pulled off, but you can see the idea of that vision, what that might offer for black people. The Chesapeake Marine Company remained successful until the U.S. economy crashed in 1873, and that caused financial trouble for them, as it did for so many business owners across the country. Okay, after our little dive down to the docks there, let's pan out again and get back up to the federal level, where in 1866, most of the northern public was getting really angry at President Johnson. Johnson, I guess this is the easiest way to think of it, for most Northerners, Johnson was way too lenient on the South. Most Northerners wanted those Southerners punished for having brought about this war, led to the deaths of my son or brother or father, fill in the blank. And Johnson wanted to be really lenient on them, bring them back into the country quickly, with white supremacy firmly intact across the South. Johnson envisioned a post-war where white Southerners would be firmly in control of black people, but they would call it something different besides slavery. Congress had passed a law in 1866 called the Civil Rights Act, which guaranteed to all people, quote, the full and equal benefit of all laws. Like, that was supposed to, federal law was supposed to say, hey, states, you can't make laws that only apply to black people. If you make a law, it has to apply to everybody. Johnson vetoed the Civil Rights Act and said that he did it because, as long as he was president, this was going to be a country for white people. Congress then passed the Civil Rights Act with a 2/3 majority overriding Johnson's veto. And with a 2/3 majority, Congress can override a veto, and they can also add an amendment to the Constitution. An amendment needs 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate. And at this moment, those 11 states who had formed the Confederacy were not back in the U.S. Congress yet. If there were white Southerners back in the Congress, the Civil Rights Act wouldn't have passed, and neither would the 14th Amendment. But because those 11 states aren't in the Congress, the states who are in the Congress can do more things. So Congress passes this amendment in 1866. Up until this point, all of Maryland's black codes were still in force. Maryland still had those laws affecting free black people, that had existed before the war. Laws about vagrancy, laws that restricted their travel, laws that restricted their ability to hold meetings, laws that said that black people couldn't testify against white people, all that still on the books in Maryland.